It's been about 2 years since my last video about minor league football, and during my hiatus, a lot of stuff has gone down. Now, if you remember my video from that long ago, you might recall that my idea for an ideal minor football league would follow a similar setup to the NBA's G League, with each team having a developmental roster that plays in a nearby location at a smaller venue. I also promised you that I would tell you where those teams would play and what their names would be, but that would take a really long time, so I didn't forget, but here's just this cool little chart that you can pause the video and look at if you really want to. Anyways, what I really want to talk about is the 3 startup leagues that have made major moves in the past couple years and my thoughts on all of it. The USFL in the 80s was quite possibly the greatest spring football league of all time, since they were actually able to poach stars from the NFL and were really just a couple bad executive decisions away from being a premier level sports league. But the rebooted USFL's biggest claim to fame is a player getting cut from his team because he doesn't like chicken salad. As bad as that intro sounds, the USFL actually isn't doing that terrible. And I think that if they don't try to get too ambitious and if they just stay in their lane, then they can actually be here for the long haul. The funny thing is that the USFL today actually has 0 ties to the old USFL other than the name, which put them in a little bit of hot water starting out when some members from the old league sued the new league over the trademark, but they got out of it pretty easily, so they're all good on that end now. So what exactly does the USFL do that makes them any different from the other spring leagues that we've seen in the past? I don't know. In reality, there's a good amount of experimental rule changes and new broadcasting methods, but that still doesn't really make them all that unique. The XFL did the same sort of stuff, and so did the AAF, because as a spring league with lower stakes than the NFL, it's almost like your responsibility to test out these new ideas and concepts for the betterment of the sport of football as a whole. Things like having booth reviews for personal fouls and having a microchip in the ball to determine where it's downed are really good ideas, but it's important to make sure that they're feasible before applying them to a league where each game's outcome has literally billions of dollars at stake in terms of betting and investing. We saw that in action when the football microchip technology proved to make kicking an absolute nightmare for teams, since the ball was unevenly weighted. As someone who spent a lot of time myself kicking and punting, I can attest to how even small changes to a football can make a big difference. So the USFL quickly made the decision to not put microchips in the balls used by specialists. It was nothing more than a hiccup in a new league like this, but imagine if the NFL tried the same thing this past year and a team lost because of a missed kick with a chipped ball. Literally all heck would break loose among the fans of the team that lost, and also among those who bet on the wrong outcome. I think it's a good thing that the USFL is doing their due diligence to try new things in this league, even if it is something of a hot mess at times. But other than that, I don't really see anything that sets this league apart from the rest. I think the only noteworthy thing that's unique is that all teams this year are playing in one city. I think the idea behind this is that there have been so many leagues to go under in their first couple years because they couldn't fill seats, but if you have 8 teams in one city, then you're bound to at least break even on ticket sales, right? To be completely honest, this was an extremely stupid idea, because other than the season opening game, the crowds look like this. It's so bad that even finding the numbers online is impossible. Like the USFL is trying to hide something, even though their drone cameras pan out to an empty stadium like every 30 seconds. Luckily, TV viewership is still doing halfway decent to keep them alive, but I don't think anyone in Birmingham cares about any other teams besides their own, so of course no one is going to watch the other games. They have stated that they plan to move the teams back to their hometowns next year, but I really hope that they take my advice to stick to venues that are on the smaller side, preferably under 40,000 seats. Overall, I think the USFL could end up being a decent league if they don't get too ambitious like I mentioned before, because other than the current attendance issue, it really checks all the marks for what people want in a spring football league. And the games are honestly pretty entertaining too, even if the talent isn't 100% there like it is in the NFL. Really, there's only one thing standing in the way of the USFL.
What the XFL is cooking.
Even though it's been over 2 years since the XFL last saw the field, they've been doing a lot during this time off. Starting off, The Rock bought the league just a few months after they filed for bankruptcy when COVID shut everything down. So the league plans to start things back up in 2023, which is going to be interesting to watch at the same time as the USFL's second season happening, but I'll talk about that later. Other than a few minor things like a unique developmental program for the XFL as well as a handful of different rules, the role of the XFL is very much the same as the USFL, to showcase potential NFL talent and to test new ideas in hopes of the NFL and NCAA adopting the best ones. Now, what the XFL has that the USFL doesn't is what I think is a major step in the right direction of forming a healthy and long-lasting spring football league. The NFL and XFL formed a partnership to make an official agreement that the two leagues would collaborate on things like rule changes, technological advances, and new safety measures. Just when I got excited that the XFL could end up turning into the NFL's D-League like I proposed in my other video, The Rock's co-owner Danny Garcia shot down that idea immediately, since I guess she must have seen my video and not liked it. There's always a chance that it could evolve into that down the road, but right now it seems more just like a symbiotic relationship than anything else. Since the XFL now has the NFL's seal of approval, that could spell trouble for the USFL since they're kind of the odd man out in this scenario. If I had to guess what happens next, I don't think that would be too crazy of an idea for the XFL and USFL to actually merge like the AFL and NFL did back in the 1960s. I mean, just think about it. Both leagues consist of 8 teams, and there's only 2 overlapping cities, so relocating a couple teams wouldn't be too much of a problem, and it's in the best interest of both teams. Since the USFL doesn't have the NFL's approval, and they're streaming on Peacock and Fox Sports instead of the much more popular ESPN, they would probably go under first now that they're competing for views with the XFL. So the XFL wins in this situation, right? Well, what I'm thinking is that if this happens, Roger Goodell is going to look at the USFL's failure, knowing it's basically the same business model at the XFL, and then look at The Rock like, and then The Rock is going to be like, the NFL pulls out of their little agreement with the XFL to reduce the risk of being a part of a failing business model, and the XFL goes under as a result. Boom. No one wins. But what if in 2023 the two leagues either announce a merger, most likely for the 2024 season just because things like that take time, or they do what the NFL and AFL did with the Super Bowl at first by having their own separate seasons, but at the end of the year have both their champions play each other. This would allow both leagues to run autonomously, but the championship game agreement would encourage fans to support both leagues instead of one or the other. The last startup league that I want to talk about is probably the most interesting out of the 3 to me, which is the fan-controlled football league. As the name implies, literally everything is left up to fans to decide, from the uniforms to the rosters to even the play calling. The idea behind the FCF was originally conceived as a joke by Steve Hofstetter in 2008 in a satirical article for the New York Times. But then some dudes from a group known as Fanchise thought, No, he's got a point. So after a failed attempt at buying a minor league baseball team, they actually ended up being able to buy the Salt Lake City expansion team for the Indoor Football League in 2016. This team basically became a proof of concept for Fanchise to show off to potential investors since it included a lot of the features that the current FCF has, like fans deciding the team's name and colors, as well as the play calls during the game, all through an app. Even though the team only went 5-11, it was an absolute success for Fanchise since their goal was not necessarily to win games, but rather to show that this whole idea of letting fans play the role of GM and coach was feasible. Ready to move on, Fanchise dissolved the Screaming Eagles and got started on what we now know today as fan-controlled football. At first glance, it seems like just your normal indoor football league, if you can even call indoor football normal to begin with. But when we take a deeper look at the ins and outs of this league, it really starts to become clear that this is nowhere near ordinary. It's almost like a fun house of just crazy ideas for football. Before I get to the in-game rules, let's take a look at how this league is set up. It started out with just 4 teams in 2021, but expanded to 8 teams this year. And according to Wikipedia, there's plans to add 2 more teams in the future, but I couldn't find any verification on that, so take that as you will. Since the FCF is a new league that needs to find every opportunity to promote themselves, I believe that they were very strategic with who they sold their teams to gain attention. There are several social media stars that are owners like Destroying, Bob Menery, Riley, Ronnie 2K, and Aiden Ross, as well as a bunch of former and current NFL stars like Marshawn Lynch, Richard Sherman, Dalvin Cook, and Austin Eckler. There's even a team owned by NFT people, which I don't really understand, and honestly, I'm kind of glad I don't right now. But the point is that the FCF has been very proactive in keeping up with trends and pushing their brand to the spotlight without having to waste money promoting it on TV like most leagues in the past have had to do. That leads me to my next point, which is how you can actually watch fan-controlled football. There are a couple streaming options through Fubo and Peacock, but the most interesting route is to watch it through Twitch, which is completely free and has the in-game voting features included on the channel, so you don't have to download the FCF app if you don't want to. All of the teams play in one city and arena, which is just an abandoned early 1900s warehouse, by the way. And unlike the USFL, none of them have allegiances to different parts of the country. This makes it so that the trading system in the league works so easily since there's a redraft every week where all but 2 players on each team get re-scrambled based on how the fans vote. This setup also allows fans to feel less tied to a poorly performing team and stay engaged in watching every game instead of just the team from their hometown or the team that has their favorite player. Now let's start talking about the gameplay itself. Each 40-minute running clock game starts with a game of rock, paper, scissors to decide who gets the ball first, and there are no special teams, so instead of extra points and 2-point conversions, the team runs a one-on-one drill. If a team wants to attempt an onside kick, they can instead run one offensive play to get 10 yards and keep possession. Also, the second-string quarterback is required to play once every 3 drives. Like I mentioned before, fans get to vote on offensive plays in real time and can determine the call on any play that is put under review. Obviously, this would go terrible for a big league like the NFL where fans have big allegiances, but since the fans aren't really expected to be extremely biased to one team, it actually seems to be not so awful of an idea. Now, I know I just spent the past couple minutes praising fan-controlled football for being a success story, but that doesn't mean I don't have a few criticisms of it. First off, there are some players in this league right now literally making close to minimum wage at $400 a week. I know these players aren't that great, and it's a startup league that doesn't have a whole lot of cash flow yet, but I know they're getting at least some cash from flow, if you know what I'm saying. The amount of money I made in one summer working at a golf course, literally just doing yard work for 7 hours a day, made more money than these professional athletes are making in an entire season. I think they deserve at least enough money to pay for rent in Atlanta. Also, with FCF's current model for their league, it's never going to be more than a gimmick. Let me just use an analogy to get my point across. So let's say that the NFL is like a really nice Japanese steakhouse like Benihana's, or for my local Raleigh audience, Konki. They have really nice food, they give you a little show, and they do the little onion volcano thing. Everyone loves it, no one has a bad time, except maybe like vegans or something. But anyways, if that's the NFL, then the USFL and XFL are kind of like Olive Garden. Is the food great? I mean, not really, but it's not bad by any means. And there's perks that Benihana's doesn't have, like bottomless breadsticks and salad. So it's still a fun time. Then we get to fan-controlled football, which is like Chuck E. Cheese. Does Charles Entertainment Cheese have the best pizza in town? No. It probably doesn't even have the best pizza in the shopping center that it's in. But what it does have is skee ball and the claw machine. In that game where you stack the little blocks that go back and forth, and then you get to where you can win the small prize, but then you say, no, I'm going for it all. I'm going for glory. I want that knockoff iPod Shuffle that's been hanging there for 12 years at least. And then you get to the last row and you're off by 1 square, and you just know that it's rigged. There's no way it isn't rigged. Anyways, what I'm trying to get across is that fan-controlled football is never going to be a primetime must-watch football league because the players and coaches just aren't that good, and the way arena football works leaves out some of the best parts of the game to watch, like big open field tackles, goal line stands, and 100-yard house calls. But it will always be something that fans can have fun with and should always have a solid cult following reinforced by a decent amount of casual fans. So yeah, just to recap it all, the USFL and XFL need to form a merger since they're basically the same thing, and fan-controlled football can keep doing whatever the heck they want to do because they've already found their niche, but they'll probably never be able to grow that much further beyond what they have now. If y'all have any thoughts or ideas on these spring leagues, keep them to yourself and don't comment them. I definitely don't want to hear your opinions. But anyways, thanks for watching and subscribing, and I will see you all later. Stay safe out there.
And there really isn't one thing that it isn't willing